Hello, friends. Welcome to Empty Cloud Monastery for another session of Monk Chat. I'm here with Bhante Sudaso to my left and Ayani Yanika to my right. Ayani Yanika is currently visiting for a few days. This is the last day, actually. And it's been lovely having you here. So hopefully this would be the first, but not the last time that you'll see Ayani Yanika here on our channel and also live Flesh and Bones at Empty Cloud Monastery. So welcome to all our friends that are slowly but surely checking in, and hopefully they will also be typing in some questions. Hello to Rick, Jayanta, Jake, and the other friends that I see as a little number. So maybe we can start by Rick, who is already asking a question. Can you share some practical ways that lay practitioners can practice the 8 precepts in everyday life? Bhante, would you like to go first?
Okay. I don't see that this needs to be me in particular, but I'll answer it anyway. So the recommendation that the Buddha usually makes in the suttas is for lay people to follow the 8 precepts on the uposatha days. So every full moon and new moon day. And if you want to be particularly austere, you can also do it on the half moons. And so practicing the 8 precepts continuously as a layperson doesn't seem to have been particularly common. But that is something you could try, is taking it on for longer periods of time. But it's usually recommended to start by doing it, again, on the uposatha days. And if you wish, then you can increase that to also doing it on the half moon days. And then if that's going really well, then you might consider following the 8 precepts for a week and see what it feels like to follow the 8 precepts for an entire week. And then if that's still going well, then you might consider doing it for longer periods of time. So as for practical ways to practice the 8 precepts, well, they're really not complicated. Well, don't kill anything, which hopefully you're doing anyway. Don't steal anything. Again, hopefully you're doing that anyway. So don't do anything sexual. So that's, for some people, that's the difficult one. For others, it's actually not difficult at all. So don't tell any lies. Again, you should be doing that anyway. Don't use any intoxicants. Again, you should be doing that anyway. So much of this is things which you should already be doing as part of the 5 precepts. The big step is just practicing celibacy. So if you're currently in a sexual relationship, then you might want to have a conversation with your partner before taking on the 8 precepts. Otherwise, it can put a very uncomfortable strain on your relationship. So especially if you're doing it for more than just one day a week or something, then again, try not to hurt anybody's feelings. Make sure to have a conversation with them beforehand. And then the other precept, so not eating afternoon, again, just try not eating afternoon. See what it feels like. Not using entertainment. Again, that's actually a really good thing to do once a week or so. So just not to listen to any music, don't watch any shows, don't do any singing or dancing, and also not wearing jewelry or makeup or cosmetics of any kind. So what does that feel like, to just let your body be in its natural condition for a day? And not using luxurious bedding. So just sleep on a simple bed. It's like a mattress and a pillow and a blanket. That's really all you need. You don't need anything fancy or special. You just need the bare minimum. So yeah, see what it feels like to do it on the uposatha days. And if that's going well, then you can increase it to also doing the half moon days. And if that's going really well, then you might consider doing it for longer periods of time. Again, like doing a whole week, and see what happens. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Bhante. And Aya, do you have anything else to add? All right. And good to see some other friends checking in. Hello, Bill. Bill had a question. I remember it last night that was off topic. Hopefully, you're going to bring it tonight. Again, hello, Suze, Kumu, J. Lyles, Amir. Well, you're too many. Janaki, good to see you. Yankee, J. Kala, etc. Good to see you, friends. And Karen says, deep sympathy for the death of your dear cat. Thank you so much. Yes, we're still mourning a little bit, but also very grateful that actually he's not in pain anymore. It was a little bit brutal in the last couple of hours of his life. So there's a bit of relief in that at least he's not experiencing that. And actually, it's been really beautiful the whole day. There have been so many actually pictures and messages sent worldwide, actually, literally worldwide, of different people who have met Stan in either passing when they were coming to the monastery or actually spent time meditating with him, spent time, longer periods of time. Maybe they were neighbors as well, or different friends, and they all had different moments to share with him, different thoughts and ways through which he had impacted their lives. So that actually was such a beautiful thing to recollect on, right, Bante? Like the goodness that he has done in the world and how many people he has impacted. So also makes us think, all those good deeds must have some really good vipaka. So I think actually Stan right now is having a really good time in his good rebirth. So may he be well and happy. May all good things come to him. And Jay Lyle says, what are the risks and dangers of meditation? How can they be avoided or mitigated? And how can one recover from them when they occur? Would you like to take this one?
I don't really feel qualified to take this one. I know it's an issue, but I think it's a case-by-case issue. And so it's not something that I would want to look at as a global thing. How about either of you?
Yeah, well, first off, I think it as Janika was saying, it varies from person to person and case to case, and also depends strongly upon what kind of meditation you're doing. Mm-hmm. So some meditation methods are more foolproof than others. So things like metta meditation and mindfulness of the body are pretty harmless. It's hard to go wrong. But I would say the general drawbacks that people tend to fall into, one big one is getting into a narrowness of mind. So there's often some confusion about concentration, where people think concentrating means narrowing the mind instead of stilling the mind. So that's an important distinction, which I've seen some people fall into. Similarly, another issue is people mix up concentration with spaciness. So they think that concentration means like spacing out into this dull, hazy cloudiness of mind, but that's also not correct. The mind should be very sharp and alert during concentration. And again, it really depends upon the method. It depends upon the person. It depends upon their conditions. This is one of the reasons why it's important to have some kind of conversation with one or more teachers, because it can help to clarify your own particular difficulties. But I would say that generally speaking, the benefits of meditation practice vastly outweigh any potential risks for most people, especially when you're doing, again, harmless methods like metta meditation and mindfulness of the body. They're pretty much good for anyone for the most part.
Yeah, thank you, Venerables, for sharing that. I will only just add a little bit what Bante already touched on, which is the importance of having a teacher and spiritual practitioners that are ahead of us on the path. That we touch base with regularly, and having trust in the feedback that they give us. And I would say that one of the risks and dangers that I've seen, that is not necessarily of meditation per se, but rather the approach that we can have with meditation, is when we get very arrogant in spiritual practice and think we know better. And we start taking sometimes even different traditions, mixing them up together, thinking that we know what we're doing, but in reality, we can actually create really poor conditions for ourselves, and actually that can create psychotic attacks, for example, because we don't quite understand what we need to do with the mind. So it's no different than medicine. Sometimes, like, we if we have the right medicine for the right condition that we have, then it would be perfect. But if we apply different medicine, it's not that the medicine is bad, it's just that we don't know what we're doing, and that could, even if advised to do something else, we take that medicine over there, then actually it can have some side effects. It can have some can actually make the problem worse. So having that humbleness of understanding that we're not quite there yet, we're not enlightened yet, we're not really 100% aware of our delusion. And it's much easier for others who are not us to somewhat see our delusion or our weak spots, etc. Then it's easier to avoid, the kind of problems that can happen. Yeah, otherwise, maybe we just even like, a particular type. Maybe we like visualization, for example. There's lots of incredible Tibetan practices that are all based on visualizations, but perhaps our karmic conditions right now are not the best to do visualization practice, because our mind is prone already to a lot of delusion. And so that if we kind of get still and we're like, oh no, I'm not going to do any mindfulness of the body because whatever, that's boring, and that's just, like what those Hinayanas there do. I'm just going to do my very advanced visualizations, even though advised not to. That can be very problematic. So always being humble and always going to teachers and always having a point of reference, I think, is a very good thing.
I would add one thing. Often when I hear this question, it's coming from someone who's looking at the Buddhist teachings and psychology, and they're asking about things like trauma. And so there are a number of books and lectures out there now about the dangers of meditation on a traumatized person. And I would say the Buddha has a lot of absolutely wonderful medicine, and there are wonderful teachers who can help apply that medicine. However, particularly, the teachers that I know, it's not that they're going to be able to meet every trauma situation and meet it with the need of that person. So if this question is coming from a sense of there's trauma and the meditation is bringing up more than I can bear, I would say look for help for that in the world that is skilled at addressing. So it's not that you can't go to a physical medicine doctor or a mental health doctor or a addiction recovery community or any of these other things when the issues have stemmed from there. Don't expect that sitting down and looking at the mind, those things just even out.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons why it's important to consult with meditation teachers, because also a good teacher will be able to recognize, like, okay, this person is not just going to meditate their problems away. They actually need some help from, whether from a different teacher. Like having the teacher also needs the humility to recognize that some people, they're not the right teacher for, and that person needs a different teacher. But also if somebody needs conventional psychotherapy. So every now and then someone shows up who really they don't really right now need monastic Buddhism. What they need right now is to see a psychotherapist for a little while and sort out some of their difficulties. And then after that time, then maybe they can benefit from monastery time. So a good teacher will also be able to recognize where to send somebody to, so that that person will make the best progress.
Right, and Jake asks, does a being born in a hell realm realize that they are in hell and that it is a result of their karma from past life? Alternatively, what about those in heaven realms? I would say that being born in a hell realm, do we realize that? Absolutely, it's a hell realm. We don't. When we could ask, when we are reborn within this life in a really unpleasant conditions, do we realize that they are unpleasant? Absolutely. Now, interestingly enough, I think that when we are reborn into a heavenly realm, I think there is a lot more delusion because we tend to never really question like what we have, like where it's coming from, right? We always question the unpleasant, but the pleasant, we're like, give me more of that, please, thanks. Actually, this is quite not enough. It's really, it could be better. So there's always that one-upping of the heavenly realm. So we take it for granted. In terms of understanding that it's the result of their karma, I would say that just as our experience as humans, we can see there is a very small percentage of human beings, for example, that understand that a human rebirth is the result of past karma. The majority are completely clueless. And even when one has a knowledge of karma and rebirth, even within this life, when tragic things happen to us, it's very difficult to understand that there is anything that we have done in the past, because also maybe we don't remember. So it just really seems random. Our experience is different than reality. Similarly, if we have good things, if we have good friends, if we have a good relationship, if we have, loving parents, etc., just take that for granted, usually, for the most part, not understanding that it's all this kind of web of causality. So I would say it's the same, both in hell realms and heavenly realms, depending on the different sort of circumstances. But actually seeing essentially, causality in this way, like really understanding it, not intellectually, but experientially, is part of the awakening process, that we understand that we don't live in a random world where certain things like actually happen because of a reason, and some others are like, just happening out of nowhere. So we also understand that is part of the path, realizing that for ourselves, and also lightening up a little bit whenever something really heavy happens to us. We start seeing, this is just suffering that arises and suffering that ceases, and it's okay. Anything else that the Venerables want to add? Okay. And Manny says, I was able to do 2 meditations last Saturday. Thanks for Ayasoma's motivation. Oh, I'm very happy that I don't remember exactly how I can get this credit, but I'll take that. That's some nice karma points. A little bit of success in meditation causes excitement. How can I deal with that? Yeah.
Well, see it for what it is. I mean, excitement's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a conditioned thing. You got excited. Okay. I just don't make a big deal of it. No matter what is arising, it's what's arising. And it's like just opening the heart, being with, letting it be. If you get excited and you want to go on and be excited again, then you're setting something up. But having some excitement, nice.
Yeah, also just looking like what's behind the excitement. Just my reading of this is that it's probably because of enthusiasm for meditation practice. That's very wholesome. So it's actually good. I'm happy you're excited about meditation instead of like bored or dreading or irritated or turned off or whatever. Instead, you're like, yes, I'm excited about meditation. That's a good thing to be excited about. So I actually don't see anything wrong here.
Yeah, exactly. We want to actually intentionally create some positive associations, especially, at the very beginning, it can be very dreadful to do meditation practice. It's true. Like, I remember the first time I meditated, I was like, all right, boring. Let me space out. Okay, great. This thought is a lot more delicious. What about that other one? I actually had no problem staying, by myself, alone, sitting, and just spacing out for hours. I like totally entertain myself, no problem. But actually doing the meditation practice, very beginning, I was having even a hard time understanding what was the point of it or what was the purpose. And so once you start actually understanding, having a gist of like, wow, this is really beneficial, this is really wholesome, this is really an opportunity for cultivating wisdom, then you start also deliberately associating, making some positive associations. Actually, Bhakti-Siddhanta, I always appreciate when he gives the guided meditations, and then at the end of the guided meditation, encourages us to reflect in that moment on the quality of mind, of how the mind feels much lighter, happier, tranquil, and reflecting that basically that is essentially an instant vipaka of the karma that we have just made of the practice. And that really kind of creates that taste for it. And as we say, innately, appetite comes through eating. So the more we eat of it, the more we're like, this is pretty good. Give me more, give me more. And in that sense, it's very good. So that's, as the Buddha says over and over again, actually, that's how often he encourages the theories in the Therigatha of like, really bind yourself to the Dhamma, attach yourself to the Dhamma, like really glue yourself to the Dhamma. This is my extra thing where like, we can have all these ideas, oh, no attachment, no nothing, no excitement towards anything. No, that's like very advanced practice. After we're done all the work, then we can, stop attaching to to this. But now we actually have to intentionally cultivate just a wholesome attachment. So we replace the attachment to chocolate and peanut butter and whatever, jelly, sandwiches, I don't know.
Wait,
you do
all three?
Don't you
Chocolate,
do that?
peanut butter, and jelly
why
sandwich?
not?
It's an American thing. You put a lot of things in those sandwiches.
I think any two of those three, but not all three together.
Well, I only put one or the other. So I think that when I see that happening. Anyway.
Get ready some excitement here.
It's an international monastery, so we have different ideas on what goes with what. But yeah, so we relinquish those attachments that are completely useless, and we replace them with something, with an attachment that is useful, which is the attachment to the Dhamma. And then when we cross the shore, so to speak, then we can let go of that attachment, let go of that excitement for the Dhamma. That like, yeah, now I'm going to meditate. That's great. Yeah, no, keep it going. And Jay Kala goes, I would be curious to hear how you personally understand and explain Sankara, Nidana, and Paticca Samuppada.
Well, there's a few different ways of relating to this. One way which I actually quite like is to starting with the idea that reality is fundamentally formless. That the basic nature of all things is formlessness, is emptiness. But then out of ignorance, out of delusion, so this in particular means not understanding anicca, dukkha, anatta, and not understanding emptiness, so not understanding the fact that everything is inherently formless, then we generate the experience of forms. We generate the experience of separate objects. We generate the experience of distinct phenomena. And we take those seriously as being real. So right now I'm like looking at a computer screen, and there's a water bottle over there, and there's a monk over there, and there's a chair over there, and I'm taking all of these as being genuinely real self-existent objects. But actually, properly speaking, they're just imaginings in my own mind. So it's not that there's nothing out there, because that would also be a misunderstanding. It's a misunderstanding to say that nothing exists. But it's also a misunderstanding to say that there actually really is a chair over there. There actually really is a monk over there. So it's from delusion that we generate the constructs that we then interact with as though they were self-existent phenomena. So that's one way of relating to this, which I personally find quite delightful. It's this idea that out of the inherent formlessness, shapelessness, emptiness of reality, then we create formations based upon our own delusion, our delusion that the world is made of formations. Then we generate formations. That's actually how I usually relate to it now that I think about it. Yeah.
Bhante, do you think, because how I relate to it, I was actually very interested. I think we had this conversation earlier. I mean, before, not earlier. Definitely we didn't have it earlier. But how I was thinking about it in terms of avijja, paccaya, sankara was that ignorance creates the conditions for then consciousness to arise and basically settle on namarupa and so forth. That is how I always related to, not always, but at least somewhat recently, taking Sankara as the conditions essentially for the whole cycle to have. So with the arising of avijja, there is the conditions for consciousness and everything else to come.
Okay, so then so what's coming to mind now is a slight variation on what you're saying, is then to take Sankara as meaning like the building blocks for conscious experience.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's a very interesting. Yeah, I can buy into that. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, one of the nice things I find about Paticca Samuppada actually is that there are many different ways of interpreting it and applying it. And it's not necessarily that one way is more right than another way, but rather that at different times we'll find different models and interpretations to be helpful in different ways. So also with the different time scales of Paticca Samuppada, so whether it's one moment or one life or 3 lives or many moments or whatever, like it's any of those models are actually useful in their own way. So I don't find, and also then when talking about different ways of interpreting and applying the different steps, I've actually come across many different models of understanding Paticca Samuppada, and I found a lot of usefulness in all these different models. So I'm actually not a believer that there is only one correct interpretation and everything else is automatically wrong, but rather that it's a framework for understanding causality, which we can use to help bring a little more clarity into our experience. And Yannicka, do you have thoughts on this?
Actually, nothing that I can articulate yet. It's a framework that I'm really exploring, and it doesn't feel like it's like born enough to speak effectively to it yet.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, I always relate to it like a web. So like that, because at the very beginning, when I first encountered the teachings of Paticca Samuppada, it was actually a little bit abstruse to me because I couldn't understand this kind of like linear thing. And then it goes back to square one and 1, 2, 3, 4. And then just reflecting on dependent origination, aside from the sort of list, it's not actually this produces this, but rather with the arising of this together with other conditions, then you have a result. And so then I started somewhat, that's why I was relating to Sankara as the conditions, based on avijja that then create the sort of web of all the other conditions to come into being for suffering to arise.
I think that's also a very apt imagery, because with a web, if you pull on any one node in the web, then you actually pull the rest of the web as well.
Yeah.
And it also reminds me of the Mahayana simile of Indra's net, where like every node in the net reflects all the other nodes. So even though they're distinct phenomena that are all interrelated, each one automatically implies the existence of all the other ones. So it's also the same with Paticca Samuppada. Like every link in it, like you pull out one link and you wind up talking about all of them.
Yeah.
And the Sankara link is one in particular that I'm quite interested in. The constructed nature of it, because it helps pull apart that certainty that this is real, like you were saying earlier. And when I can drop that certainty that what I'm constructing is oh so worth constructing, then there's a lot more peace.
Yeah, and this also it's what the Kachanagota Sutta is pointing to. So the Buddha is pointing to how normally we think of things as either existing or not existing. Like this is real, this really exists. That is not real, that definitely doesn't exist. But he says these are completely wrong. These are just sankharas. So we create this idea of something existing or this idea of something not existing, but reality is other than that.
That I must now defend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, mine is more right than yours, and it's time to get out the swords and fight about this. And let's not. Just to be clear.
Let's
yeah.
not.
Yeah, and in the middle, we have already become affected by old age, sickness, and ultimately death, and then we have to start all over again.
Yeah.
And what we're doing is actually we're just experiencing the arising of dukkha.
Yeah.
So like we're making a big deal about my views of existence and non-existence, but actually we're just attached to the arising of dukkha and not paying attention to the ceasing of dukkha.
Right, thank you. And Bill says, yesterday's talk about volition and intention, I asked about right speech. Can you offer tips on how to practice right speech in everyday life? I'm very happy that you remembered to ask this question. Don't volition and intention intertwine with right speech? Am I off base? So I'll pass this on to Ayani Anika, and actually then also Bhante Sudasu, since I wasn't part of the panel last night.
I think I would start with, have you noticed when that thing slips out of your mouth that you really didn't mean to say, but you've been thinking it in your head for a while, and out it comes and you have insulted Aunt Matilda's dress or whatever. So the volition of that thinking pattern has been informing the speech that comes out of your mouth. Of course, it can happen much more intentionally. It can happen very grossly. But I would look at the things that I'm assuming you're already trying with right speech, to follow the guidelines. But it's where I really find volition important is the things that slip out. And you realize that you are not creating the conditions behind it, where you're creating the precursors to an action, the movement, the momentum is back there, and the pressure is going to build up and out it's going to come. And it's wrong speech, and out it's come. So for me, working with volition and speech is really purifying the mind. It's really purifying the heart. It's setting up the conditions so that the actions you take are from a force of good. So volition really has a strong impact on your speech. And even if you try to restrain it, if you're cultivating junk, out will come junk.
Yeah, and don't volition and intention intertwine with right speech?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, because as Ayanika was saying, speech always comes from the mind. It always originates from the mind. And so we want to establish the intention to always speak right speech. So to always speak words that are true, that are beneficial, that are gentle, that are spoken at the right time in the right way, and that help people make progress towards awakening. So starting with that intention, then you watch your mind. Whenever you have the urge to speak, double check that you're actually about to speak right speech. So in this way, yes, absolutely, volition and intention are important elements of right speech.
Yeah. I think Bill was probably asking because you had skipped his question yesterday.
Well, he had asked about right speech, and I told him to bring it to monk chat.
Yeah, glad it's a really important topic.
Yeah.
But don't just stop at the stuff you think you're intentionally doing. Look back further and further and further. How are you creating the space that wrong speech might come out?
Great, thank you. And Crazy Faith, nice nickname, says, will the link be shared when Khentrul Rinpoche visits? How can I join the live stream for that day? Thank you. Thank you for reminding us. That's a very good point. Yes, we will live stream it, and we'll try to put the link up tomorrow or so. And oh, thank you, Rick. Says, my heart is filled with compassion for all of you. May stand, enjoy a wonderful rebirth. Sadhu. And good to see you, Yudi. And Anjan says, does speech have to be beneficial to be right speech? How do I know whether what I say will benefit the other person, or is right speech just abstention from harsh, harmful, and impure speech?
I mean, at its basic minimum, then it is just abstaining from, as you say, harsh, harmful, and impure speech. That's the basic minimum of right speech. But the Buddha also says that we should go a step beyond and to speak words which are lovable, speak words which are wholesome, speak words which help people make progress towards awakening. And he says to speak words which are worth treasuring. This actually is one of my favorite ways the Buddha describes wholesome speech. In Pali, it's nidana vating. So nidana means like a treasure that you want to store and keep. So nidana vati means something that's worth treasuring, worth storing because it's precious and valuable. So the Buddha says that's the kind of speech that we should try to use. It's the sort of speech where someone hears it and they're like, ooh, I want to remember that. That's really precious. So the Buddha, the basic minimum of right speech that the Buddha gives is, it's refraining from false speech, from harmful speech and useless speech and so on. But we also want to go the other direction and make a conscious effort to speak in a way which is kind and supportive of people, to speak words which are valuable to people. And that does require a bit of extra thought and consideration and some retraining of old habits. But it's really worth making the effort.
Yeah, and Shadow Label asks, is chanting meant to cause vibrations in the body? If so, what are the benefits? Aya?
I can't say what it's meant to do. My experience is that for me, chanting does create vibrations in the body. And let me see, what's the benefit? I think try it on and see for yourself if that manner of vibration is creating ease, or is it the words that are, or is it the community you're doing it with? I mean, there's just so many factors. I have found, like when I go to International Tipitaka chanting and there's a room full of monastics, and we've been doing this for several days, that the resonance to me can be very meditative. Another person can find that extremely difficult, so I don't think it's a one size fits all. And it isn't necessarily going to be the same in everybody every time. Others?
Good. Thank you, Venerable. And good to see you, Ronald and Bhumika and Javelin. And Sud says, by the way, Sud, congratulations for your child. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. You're going to be a really wonderful father, and your wife as well, beautiful mother. So we rejoice, Empty Cloud, for a new being that has so much good karma to be born. Or reborn, rather, with you and your wife as parents, and that you have that beautiful intention of raising them in the Dhamma. So, Osanumadana Sadhu for next week. So this offering Dana here at the Empty Cloud. So yeah, we're all rejoicing. And Sud asks, is there a katina ceremony in your monastery where lay people can offer robes and other requisites to monastics? Yes, absolutely. It will be not this Sunday, but the following Sunday, Sunday the 23rd of October. And we hope to see you there. I look forward to seeing you there. It will be the whole day, so it will be quite lovely. And if you need to, if you have questions of any sort, just you can write an email at info@emptycloud.org, and someone will get back to you. And Jay Lyle says, Venables, when a living bhikkhu's words are in conflict with the suttas, should one listen to the bhikkhu or to the suttas? Well, I would like to replace suttas with Dhamma. And in that case, then I would say, one should always listen to the Dhamma, and one should always listen to the Buddha. So the Buddha is the foremost teacher. The reason why I'm replacing the Dhamma with the suttas is that not everything that is, written in the text that we have, not everything has been preserved properly. So it's important to know that if we just get fixated with one sort of quote, Anguttara Nikaya, like page 376, I don't know, I'm just saying. Well, and then we hear that, either a bhikkhu or a bhikkhuni say something that is in contradiction with page 376 in the Anguttara Nikaya. It's not that we follow either page 376 of the Anguttara Nikaya or the bhikkhu or the bhikkhuni, but rather we want to understand how does that fit within the context of the Dhamma as a whole, with the teachings of the Buddha. So one really great thing about the teachings of the Buddha, by the way, is that everything, by the way, makes sense. It's logical. Like it's not just one thing that is kind of random, and it has to be coherent. And also, once you start getting a taste for it, you really understand what it's really not in sync with it. It's kind of like if you are constantly eating, food from Kerala in India, and then at a certain point you have food from Rajasthan, you understand that there's a difference. Maybe at the very beginning, if you're new to India, you're not Indian, and you go there, you're like, oh, this is Indian food, it's all the same. But if you only have food in one particular region for a long period of time, and then you go and have something that quote unquote looks similar, you will go like, hey, this is a little bit off. It's a little bit different to what I'm used to right now. So it's the same with the Dhamma. What I actually like to do is during my winter retreats is I pick up one of the Nikayas and I just read it cover to cover nonstop. Like I do that for, I actually deliberately take like for example, I was like, okay, I'm going to read the Anguttara Nikaya in only 1 month, which means a ridiculous amount of suttas that I read every day, to the point of brainwashing my mind. voluntarily, deliberately, because I kind of like want to replace temporarily my wrong view and replace it with the Dhamma to get that kind of like flavor. I'm like, and then you'll find sometimes that it's like, Rajasthan. Not that there's anything with Rajasthan, so don't get me literally, but like you're like, oh wait, this is off. And in that way, you kind of have a bit of a sense of the Dhamma that kind of guides you in general. So whether it's something that you're reading in a book or you're hearing, it's a bhikkhu or bhikkhuni, or maybe it's your fellow lay practitioner, and you can go like, this is a bit off, but don't take it like, oh, I like it, I don't like it, or I think this is true, or I think this is not true, or I believe in this, or I don't believe in that. Actually, take it as a as a way of investigating the Dhamma. So this is what I find really beautiful, actually, of the practice of the Dhamma, that this is our job. We're supposed to understand it. We are not supposed to just believe it. Makes no sense. It's kind of believing in math and that not knowing how to do 1 + 1 = 2. Like, what's the point of believing in math? It's completely pointless. So it's something that we need to understand. We need to investigate and then use it in order to liberate ourselves. So yeah, it's not as simple as like, I believe in that. I believe in the bhikkhu, or I believe in the bhikkhuni, or I believe in the suttas, or whatever it is. I believe in maybe a different religion, because now I don't like either the suttas or the bhikkhu or the bhikkhuni. Like, we have to be a little bit more serious with the practice. And I don't know if the venerables have any other suggestion. In the suttas, it says, Kumo, gradual training is explained by the Buddha a lot and gives a solid sila as the foundation. What exactly is right livelihood? Livelihood for someone not into a career? Is that how they live? Oops. Actually, maybe I'll pass this on to Yanika again, because you hear from us a lot. So
yeah, this is a tired mind over here. Let's see. Yeah, right livelihood. The simplest one, it just says, is not conducting wrong livelihood. But then when you go and look at what is wrong livelihood, it's such things as marketing and poisons, or human trafficking, harming animals, these kinds of things. So you may not be explicitly in a career of human trafficking, let's hope, or marketing poisons, but you may find that your industry is doing a lot of poisoning of the environment, or you may find that the way that they conduct business doesn't feel ethical, or there's so many subtleties. So the very basic is just to avoid those specific professions that the Buddha advises are not right livelihood. And then you can work into the subtlety of it. Is when I'm conducting my professional life in this manner, it's leading to wholesome results. When I'm conducting it in this manner, might be the same profession, it's not leading to wholesome results. When I engage in this area of livelihood at all, I find my practice is completely stopped up, because I'm cutting myself off, because I know the sila is not what it should be. So I think it's much more of a package to look at. How is your profession informing your practice? And is this what you want to be spending your life energy doing?
Yeah, I think the basic thing with right livelihood versus wrong livelihood is considering, how are my actions affecting the well-being of sentient beings? So so you say, for those who are not into a career, then just take that principle and apply it to everything that you do. So I think the Buddha singles out right livelihood because he's I mean, he's basically just saying the same thing he says everywhere else, which is don't hurt people, try to help people. I mean, that's basically all Buddhist sila is don't hurt people, try to help people. And people includes animals, by the way. So that's also right livelihood. So yeah, if you don't currently have a job, if you're not currently involved in a career, well, then just whatever you do, try not to hurt anyone and see what you can do to help people.
Yeah, that's exactly, I think, what you mentioned. Also for monastics, we're definitely not into a career, but is yeah, where is the food that is coming from? The food that we're eating, where is how is the shelter, where is it coming from? Like essentially all our requisites, how are we acquiring these requisites? And that, of course, there's a lot of overlapping with you know, all the other different actions that we have to do: right action, right speech, right intention, so forth. So I would say especially right intention. So the if we have the correct intention, then naturally all these requisites will come with well, if we have right view and right intention, then naturally the requisites that we're acquiring will apply under right livelihood. But if instead we start stealing the robes from our spiritual companions, or we start, yeah, like taking what is not given to us on the table, and or not on the table, maybe in the shelf, in the cupboard, and so forth. We're being quite dishonest with what we're communicating to others, and yeah, getting shelters that maybe were given to someone else, and so forth. All of that makes it for really bad livelihood. So maybe we look out from the outside that we're all doing the same thing and living in the same way, but it's not quite like that. And Jay says, could you explain the differences between pamaja, piti, and sukha? All seem to be types of happiness, but I struggle to understand the exact differences. Svante?
Yeah, well, to be honest, I think that outside of talking about jhana, then there's not really much point in going into the refined differences because, as you say, they are all just different shades of happiness. If you want a more precise distinction, pamoja is more like cheerfulness. That's the translation I'm most fond of these days, cheerfulness. Piti, I usually translate as euphoria. And sukha more generally is happiness or pleasure. So in the suttas, sukha, by the way, is a catch-all term which kind of automatically includes all three, and it's only in the context of jhana practice and in a few other specific cases where the Buddha distinguishes sukha to mean a certain kind of happiness. So pamoja is this general cheerfulness or upliftedness of mind. Piti is this powerful euphoria which appears in the body, particularly as a result of practicing samadhi. And sukha is a more tranquil, serene kind of happiness, which comes primarily through the reduction in one's hindrances and defilements. But again, this is in the context of samadhi practice that I would make these three distinctions. Outside of that context, these words have a somewhat broader and more flexible meaning. And there's a lot of overlap between these three terms. Again, it's only in the context of samadhi practice that it makes sense to really like piece apart these three words.
And thank you, Bante. And Jake asks, I was recently introduced to the terms vitaka and vichara. Can you please speak upon their role in meditation and establishing mindfulness? Okay. Bante, I'll pass this on to you as well.
Okay. Yeah, well, there's different interpretations of what these terms mean because they're not actually clearly defined in the suttas. So the word vitaka, the most literal meaning is thought. And the word vichara, its literal meaning is wandering. So we have thought and wandering. So what does this mean in terms of meditation? Well, these are things which are present only during, in the development of samadhi, they're present only during first jhana, but disappear when moving into second jhana and are absent for all higher states of samadhi. And Vitakka and Vichara are seen as the obstacles or the flaws which will cause one to fall out of deeper samadhi. So when one starts to turn attention towards Vitakka and Vichara again, then one will drop from second jhana back into first jhana, for example. So I usually relate to these as just meaning that certain amount of non-volitional background noise which persists in the mind even when the mind is very concentrated. There's still a certain amount of background noise in the mind, which doesn't completely fade away until second jhana. So that's how I usually relate to this. But many meditation teachers will talk about Vitakka and Vichara as being the forceful application of mind in trying to force the mind to stay on the meditation object. And that when one is moving deeper into samadhi, then the meditation becomes increasingly effortless. And therefore that forceful application of mind ceases. It drops away because it's not necessary anymore. So that's another way of relating to these terms, which also can be helpful. Again, it's not my usual way of thinking about it, but I find it also a useful framework for understanding. So those are a couple ways of relating to these words.
Thank you, Bhakti. And Kristen says, hi, Venerables, especially Ayani Anika. Regards to the unburdened duties part of the Metta Sutta, how can one best intuit what I think unburdened is for a layperson?
The Pali is appa kicca. So appa means few, and kicca means literally things to do.
Yeah, with few duties and minimalist lifestyle.
Yeah.
Well, I would say that, it's not terribly different from a monastic, and it's also terribly different from a monastic in the way that, obviously, that's why we become monastics, to abandon pretty much anything, any worldly sort of commitment. And that's why we also stay as householders to understand that we're still trying to make progress in the path while also having lots of different responsibilities. But the attitude of mind, I would say the aspiration has to be the same. So really being frank with ourselves and with how we go about our lives, and really seeing, really making a qualitative assessment of our aspirations, of our ambitions, of what motivates us, like every morning. I used to live in New York City, and I moved there from London, and then before that I was in Milan. So 3 very specific cities in the world that have one really incredible thing in common: getting stuff done. Achieving, getting up on the ladder, achieving things, like being very ambitious. If you're very ambitious, you want to go to Milan, you want to go to London, you want to go to New York. You don't really go to, I don't know, Canicattì, which is probably a town you've never heard in Italy. Exactly. Bante was like, what's that? Or, I don't know, to Bristol in the UK. Or you don't really go to the what?
Des Moines, Iowa.
Des Moines. I don't even know how to pronounce it.
Spell it.
I think I do. Des Moines, so I always
yeah,
got
there you go,
it in my
there you go.
mind.
And I'm actually happy about this.
Yeah, there's nothing bad with any of these cities, but you see how the mind goes in that direction. So we can actually, if we're honest with ourselves, we're like, for example, I moved to New York City not to have really a good quality of life. Why did I move to New York City? Why am I living in New York City? I remember when I had met Bhante Sudaso, actually, and moved to New York City with the intention to start this organization. At the very beginning, I was like, wow, this city is really dirty and loud and stinks and like very difficult to live with. And I was like, what are you talking about? This place is so awesome. Great. Like you can, find everything you want in New York City. Like I really believed it. And it was such a different experience from the one that I actually had 2 weeks ago going to New York City. And I was like, oh, wow, now I really understand what you were talking about when I met you, Bante. Like, I'm having exactly that experience. And so why is it different? The city is always the same. It's not that anything has changed, but it's actually the intention in the mind. What is the most supreme in my life is the cessation of suffering. It's not acquisition, but relinquishment. So in that way, we understand, we have to be really honest. We're like, okay, there's a lot of addiction where what exactly am I doing with my life? And then if we're really serious with Buddhist practice, letting go little by little of the things that are really not necessary. I remember a guy that had come to our retreat center in New York, and at a certain point, someone asked him, "What do you do?" And he was like, "Yeah, I always feel like a little bit uncomfortable." He was actually very honest about it. He's like, "I feel always a little uncomfortable to share my job because I'm an archivist or something." Archivist, yeah, like in the library, like that you put the things in alphabetical order or something. And I remember going, "Oh, what an incredible job." He looked at me like, "What?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that's like a great job, because actually it's a perfect job that you want to have if you want to do meditation practice in the way that it's something that you're not passionate about. Like it's just something that it's a menial job that doesn't disturb you that much, and that it's right livelihood. It's great. You're actually doing something useful. So people can go to the library and actually like find the books that they're looking for. So you're doing something useful. It's beneficial. It doesn't obsess your mind when you go back. You're not like, oh, how can I be like the top of the archivists in this like business? And he was like, oh yeah, that's actually really great. You're right. And I was like, yeah, actually, I kind of like my job. It doesn't stress me out. It doesn't, there's not really much dukkha in my mind when it comes to the job. The only dukkha that he was experiencing was in comparison to others. Like others were essentially kind of creating the conditions for him to think that his job was worse than, I don't know, being an investment banker, because I don't know, the investment banker was making more money or something. So it's really understanding actually what type of, it's connected to also Kumu's question before, like what is right livelihood? Also in terms of how is it conducive to spiritual practice? How is it conducive to happiness? How is it conducive to cessation of suffering? So we can have the most glamorous job, the most ridiculously well-paid job, the most prestigious job, and we can be really miserable. Really, really miserable. As a matter of fact, you don't even need to believe me. You can go and to the average, like, quote unquote successful office in New York City. Usually people are not really happy. But they will work a lot. They will be quite exhausted. They will be quite stressed out. They will have, a lot of them will be actually on anxiety pills. A lot of them will be on different ADHD pills in order to be more productive. So yeah, not really quite what we're trying to do. And they will all have a lot of duties and a very complicated lifestyle. So yeah, you can start reflecting on that and letting go little by little. That was very long story, extra long. And Randy says, I'm sorry to hear the temple cat passed away to the other side. What was his name again? Stan the man.
AKA Ajahn Stan.
Yeah.
AKA Ajahn Metta.
Yeah. He was called Stan by the shelter in New York City. Stan was originally from the Bronx, but was at the Manhattan shelter, and they called him Stan. And when I met him, I was like, you look really like a Stan. Jay Kala says, could you speak more about formlessness and maybe the Heart Sutra quote about emptiness and form? Would you say this relates to the relationship between Nama and Rupa? For example, Rupa being dependent on our feelings, perceptions, attention to it, and the emptiness of Rupa without Nama and Vijnana. This is directly directed to Bodhisattva.
Well, first off, I should point out that the Heart Sutra, emptiness and form is just the beginning. Then it goes through the rest of the 5 khandhas, and it goes through the 6 sense bases, and it goes through actually pretty much everything in Buddhism, including every step of Paticca Samuppada, the Four Noble Truths. Like, basically, the point of the Heart Sutra is that absolutely everything is emptiness, all of it. So people often get fixated on emptiness and form, but form here is rupa, physical form, as the first of the 5 khandhas. And that's just the first on a long list of things which are said to be emptiness. So there's actually, if you look up the origin of the Heart Sutra, you'll find that it's a slightly rewritten excerpt from the center of the Mahaprajnaparamita Sutra, which is very long and full of lots of deliciously wonderful things. They just pulled out a little piece from the center and kind of condensed it and rephrased it a little bit to make the Heart Sutra. Anyway, so formlessness, does this relate to relationship between nama and rupa? Well, nama is emptiness and rupa is also emptiness. The mind is emptiness and the body is also emptiness. Like, all of this has, like, these are all artificial constructs that we generate. So we talk about mind and body as being 2 separate things, but that's just an idea that we generate. They're not really separate things. We talk about the 6 senses as being separate, but they're not really separate. Technically, it's all mind. Technically, there's only one sense base, which is the sense base of mind. And we talk about there being 6, but those 6 are all just different ways of describing the mind base. Again, we talk about body and mind, but it's all just mind. Like, the body is just something we experience through the mind. So all of these ideas we have about separate domains of experience and separate objects within experience, those are all just mental constructs that we create in order to try to make sense out of the world. And it's not that this is bad or wrong, because actually those mental constructs then give us the framework for practicing what's wholesome, for practicing goodness in the world, which then makes the basis for being able to practice samadhi and wisdom, which ultimately leads to an understanding that everything is inherently formless, that these are in fact just meaningless constructs that we generate. But we also just need to be realistic. Like, are we actually to the point of directly contemplating formlessness, or do we still need to work on being nice to people? And realistically, most of us are still working on that being nice thing. So we're not quite to the point of contemplating the inherent formlessness of all phenomena.
Sadhu,
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 sadhu.
sadhu.
Keeping it real. Thank you. And actually, this is a really great quote. Amita says, "My mother says tongue is only a few centimeters, but it can do a lot of damage."
Yeah.
Facts.
Yeah, the Buddha said we're all born with an axe in our mouth.
Yeah. Yeah. And does that axe hurt? Keep on cutting ourselves with it. And Jay Kala also has a question for you, Bante. It seems like your reflections on Sankara in relation to emptiness is related to Papancha Sanya Sangha.
I haven't actually thought about that. I'm going to have to go back and read the Madhupindika Sutta again. So Papancha Sanya Sangha comes from the Madhupindika Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 21, maybe, somewhere around there. Yeah, I'll have to go back and read the sutta again and think about it in terms of emptiness. I mean, ultimately, actually, every single thing the Buddha ever said is about emptiness when you get right down to it. But sometimes the connection is more obvious than other times.
Great, thank you. This may be for Ayan. Yannicka, can you share some reflections on a teaching shared by a Buddhist friend? He said, "In Buddhism, we're not trying to become something. We're dropping and letting go of all that we are not."
Can you read that again? Can you share
some reflections on this teaching? In Buddhism, we're not trying to become something. We are dropping and letting go of all that we are not.
say that we're not. It's language that's the problem here. I'm not sure that we're trying to be something. Sure. But we are trying to do something into understanding. So it's not that there's no action happening here. It's that we're doing something towards realization. And then the dropping away and letting go of what we are not. I think that's making some sort of assumption that there's something left to be, maybe. And I'd be concerned about that. Myself, I would be focusing on what is it I'm doing, and am I reifying, am I creating some sort of identity by doing that? In which case I've solidified something. It's become a thing. And it's probably outside of reality because there's more just a process happening. And it's an exploration. So that's about as far along in it as I am right now.
Thank you. I am. Yeah, what comes to mind to me is, clearly the sort of teaching is aiming at anatta. So it's a teaching of non-self. So the idea is not to create a new atta, but rather identifying all the different attas that we have and let go of them. So identifying, this is not me, this is not mine, this is not who I am, and letting it go. But I would say that in the process, though, actually, we are actually a little bit trying to become something, in the sense of at least replacing the unwholesome attas with some wholesome attas. So actually going like, I'm someone who has really good sila. Yeah, that's an atta that is actually quite skillful right now. I'm on, like getting back to the friend that earlier was asking about meditation. I'm someone who really likes meditation. Yeah, that's an atta that we want to cultivate. I'm someone who really likes to give. Yeah, that's an atta that we want to cultivate. And then we relinquish them all. So there is something that we want to somewhat hold lightly, like as a means to an end rather than an end itself. And also I would also say that, yes, ultimately we're not trying to become something, but we are trying to develop the mind. So it's not that we're just letting go of different things, but we're also actively developing the mind. The Brahma Viharas being a really, incredible example of this. You have to develop a mind of metta. You can't just let go of aversion. You also have to develop metta for aversion to be eliminated. So while it's a cute little word play, and I understand that it's aiming towards anatta, there can be a little bit of misunderstanding, I would say. And I don't know if Bhante, you have any other reflections?
No, I think the two of you pinned it down pretty well.
All right, thank you. And Bhumika says, request you to come visit my home. Oh, you're very kind, Bhumika. Well, if you'd like to invite any of us to your home, you can write an email to info@emptycloud.org and we'll see if that is possible. And Anjan says, I do not have spiritual friends and no monastic community nearby. Do you have suggestion as to how I can develop a good practice alone? Maybe with the help of the internet and books? Yeah. Do you have suggestions?
I would say that we have the benefit of the internet. This is the one place where I'm like, you can actually have spiritual friends, and I've watched them cultivate online. So you're coming to this, there are other people coming to this. There's, there are other places where you can online get together and discuss the suttas. There are places that you can meditate together. So just because it's geographically not someone you can have a cup of tea with, well, maybe you can do that online too. I just can't have bond tape for it, and yeah, it's not quite the same. But yeah, don't necessarily. Of course, yes, you can cultivate for yourself, but spiritual friends are quite important. So I would say do look online for where you can have conversations and connections, and also, um, geographically go visit the monastery. Geographically go when there's a monastic retreat being held. Um, and then there are not just the retreats that are silent. There's also places which will do a more workshop type interaction. So look into that, and you'll cultivate the wholesome people that you want to be hanging out with. And maybe others can address the specifics of, so when you don't have that, what do you do?
No, please, Bhante, go ahead.
Just do the best you can. So the basic principles of Buddhism are actually not that complicated. So be nice, still your mind, see everything as impermanent.
Great.
That was it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And Kumo says, related to right livelihood before, does right livelihood and right action have some overlap? Is that correct understanding?
I mean,
Okay.
right action basically just means practice Buddhism. So right action is just a summary of the entire Buddhist path into 4 bullet points. So of course that also includes right livelihood by default. Yeah.
Great. And Randy shares, I have no career, so it is easier for me to help others. Just today, an old couple was lost, and I stopped to help them find the bus stop. There are opportunities everywhere to help if we only open ourselves to others. Oh, sadhu, 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 Randy.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, it's great.
And those of you who have a career, don't let that stop you from.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah, it's not. It's a terrible excuse.
Oh, Rick is suggesting, my friend may have been talking about the concept of Buddha nature. Bhante, would you want to share that?
What was the context?
Think of the question before the quote. The quote that was on anatta.
Yeah, well, that might be coming from the idea that all of us inherently, our nature is the same as that of a Buddha. It's just that we're clouded over with defilements and confusion. And so by letting go of the defilement and confusion, then our natural Buddha-like qualities will shine through.
Mm-hmm.
So it's one way of talking about Buddhist practice, which I think can be quite helpful for many people. But it's also something which can be misapplied to justify one's defilements. Mm-hmm. So I also hear people saying like, well, my mind is inherently the same as a Buddha, so there's nothing wrong if I drink and smoke and cheat on my wife. And it's like, well, no, because a Buddha wouldn't be doing those things. Anyway, but yeah, the concept of Buddha nature can be actually very helpful if used correctly.
And Rani asks, should the ego be destroyed? Venerable?
Yeah, linguistics. Destroyed. Ego. Okay, yeah. I think I don't want to even try this one. Should the ego be destroyed? I'd have to know what you mean by ego. And also by, destruction. So without more interaction, I wouldn't be able to attempt this one. But if you wanted to make an interpretation, you could answer your interpretation of the question.
No, I think it's that's sufficient. You can ask a follow-up if you'd like.
Yeah.
And Jay Lyle says, is it good to tell someone to do something that you know is risky without informing them of the risks? No.
That one's easy.
Yep. No, don't do that.
Check out this minefield.
Yeah.
What?
And Ajahn says, why isn't there any right listening as part of the Noble Eightfold Path, ninefold, for example, or is it part of right action? Something.
Right listening. I've actually never really thought about that, like where we're listening. Aya, what do you think?
Well, I think these teachings are all like different lenses into the main thing, but right listening for me, you're going to find within the Brahma Viharas, you're going to find within right view, you're going to find with right, it's like it's maybe a modern day terminology for a basic way of opening the senses with an open heart, with clarity, with not a preconceived, a fixed view, with a so right listening might be more like an umbrella term that we've made up today to cover, and I like it. I really do like it. But it's really pulling from a lot of different teachings within Buddhism to create a system of how are you showing up to the reality around you. Are you fixed? Are you kind? Are you so it's before you open the mouth, and before, you may not even choose to open the mouth to make a sound. Listening, what is right listening in meditation? There's so many ways I think that you could apply it. I wouldn't necessarily want to see it as a factor in the path. It's kind of more a ethos for walking the path.
Yeah, what comes to mind is also, I mean, just in relation to precepts. So intentionally removing certain, music, for example, or also in terms of actually how we are using our speech. So usually, if we're restraining from gossip, if we're restraining from idle chatter, for example, actually, we also don't want to listen to all of that. So I think it's kind of like a consequence of, definitely falls underneath right action, right effort, for sure, because you have to put effort into really like feeding, like what kind of nutriment are we putting in the mind? And so usually the vocal part, it's like a more of a passive thing, I would say, rather than active, like the listening. That's a bit of a few things that come to mind. Anyway, Jake says, I have always been amazed by the ability for recall and memory many monastics hold, especially remembering the names and numbers of the suttas. How do you develop such a skill?
Well, I have that skill only for the suttas. So everything else seems to just slip out of my mind.
It's true. It's a true story. I am very grateful, though, that you remember the suttas, Bhante.
Yeah.
It's always important.
But as for the suttas, I actually just read them over and over and over again, cover to cover, over and over again. And they have a way of sticking in the mind. And also the other thing is that because I consider the suttas to be something very important, then I think that also contributes to the mind holding on to them much more tightly and keeping them much more clear. Whereas like other random stuff, like fundamentally, I know it doesn't really matter, and then so it just kind of slips out of the mind. But the suttas are something really important. So holding the suttas is important, and reading them over and over again. Then you'll find that you can remember them more easily.
Great, thank you. And Hasanta asks, do the texts have a concept or term for Buddhist versus non-Buddhist? Well, here we get into a little bit semantics. Sometimes I hear people going, "Oh, the Buddha did not invent Buddhism, so Buddhism doesn't exist. It's like later creation." Da 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 da. And I would say, actually, I don't remember the exact sutta, the name of the sutta, nor the number, just to unimpress Jake. And but there's this invitation of the Buddha not to focus too much on linguistic, but rather to understand what is the meaning of the word that we're picking. And he actually pretty much gives the example of people, calling, for example, this object a cup, and one going a glass, one a vessel, one whatever it is, and then us fixating, like they're talking about like a glass, not the cup, and no, only this is true, everything else is wrong, and like we actually don't understand that we're talking about the same thing. So when we're talking about Buddhism, what are we referring to? We're referring to essentially Dhamma Vinaya. We're the dispensation of the Buddha that has been given to us. And of course, there's also that today in what we call Buddhism. There's also a bit of layers and stratification. I kind of call it how do you say, the glossing on the cake? Glossing?
Icing.
Icing. Icing glosses the cake. My mind is very funny. And yeah, the icing on the cake, but there's still the cake. So we're calling Buddhism the cake. And then, of course, now today we find the icing after 2,500 years, and that icing will be different from country to country. But when we're talking about Buddhism, essentially, we're talking about the legacy of the Buddha. So yes, of course, it is in the suttas as well. In fact, we see actually that there are people who become Buddhists. How do they become Buddhists? I remember actually there was this conversation, fun fact, at Buddhist Insights, first retreat center in Rockaway, where there were a bunch of different people, not born Buddhists, that were debating what was the definition of a Buddhist. And my definition is this one. My definition is this other one. My other definition is this one. My other definition is that one. And I remember going, okay, how about we ask the Asian Buddhists that are here? And there was someone from Vietnam, one from Sri Lanka, one from Laos, and one from Thailand, I believe. I can't remember. And each one of them gave exactly the same definition. Taking refuge in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. That's the definition of a Buddhist. And it's exactly what you see in the suttas. So will you find in the suttas, I have become a Buddhist? No, you'll see, though, the definition that is exactly there, preserved in all the different Buddhist cultures. But when we get all intellectual about this word, only this is true, everything else is wrong. Only this is true, everything else is wrong. So much papancha and very little Dhamma.
The sutta you're referring to is called Arana Vibhanga. It's in the Majjhima Nikaya analysis of non-conflict.
Sadhu.
I don't remember what number it is, though.
Halfway.
Excellent.
Okay, and we're running out of time, so we might not be able to get through the rest of the questions.
These appeared out of
Yeah, we just had a few more questions appear.
Oh.
So
maybe we can get. Manal asks, Dear Venerables, does Empty Cloud offer a dedicated live class where practitioners can have the opportunity to meditate together virtually? Separate from this, would you please offer your perspective on how best to strengthen one's regimen with meditation practice? Actually, if there are any volunteers, nod, hint, hint, who want to organize this remotely, then you can write an email to info@emptycloud.org, and everything is possible, just as long as there are different hands making this possible. Then yeah, we can offer more and more opportunities. And
how best to strengthen one's regimen of meditation practice? Well, one thing is just making a clear determination of how many minutes you're going to do, how often. And one thing that really helps is to have a calendar where every day that you meet your meditation determination, you check off that day on the calendar. So this is a very simple external tool, which is extremely helpful for keeping up a daily commitment. Because you will know if you skip a day, then there will be a blank spot on that calendar for the rest of your life, haunting you with your failure. And so then This is a way of kind of shaming yourself into keeping to your daily commitment. It works for me, by the way. This was how I read through the suttas the first time. It's using exactly this method. It worked. I never skipped a single day. Sometimes it would be like 11:30 at night, and I'm like, I have to get up at 5 a.m, but I haven't read any suttas today, so it's time to do my commitment.
Yeah, my psychology works a little different. I'm like, okay, I'll start again next week, next month, at the new page, maybe next month.
I've been on the track of Bhante Sudaso, and I still think it's a good tool. And when I'm looking at how do I build up a practice, look for the benefits of the practice. And so when I'm tuned into, way before I came to Buddhism and monastic life, I had a time period as a ballet dancer. And then raised eyebrows over here. Yeah, surprise. So many, many years ago. And my teacher said, if you skip your class one day, you will know it. If you skip your class 2 days, your teacher will know it. And not because you weren't in attendance, but because your capabilities are not there. If you skip your class 3 days, everyone will know it. And so to look at what is it that is the benefit of the meditation practice. And when that's center, it's hard not to go to the cushion.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, and I'll just give what worked for me. But that I have to say, I'm one of the, I guess, more rare Westerners that got into Buddhism not through meditation practice. Actually, that was the last thing on the menu that I was interested in. I was kind of like, okay, this is a little bit boring. And can I go to the library, please? Or take a walk in the forest, or like cook food for the Sangha. I really like doing that. Anyway, was literally actually just joining a group of people that are meditating. And so kind of by osmosis, you start, well, you're just there all the time. So you take this commitment and everybody's meditating. So once you space out, the second time you space out, the third time you space out, the fourth time you space a little bit less out. And then, and then you're kind of like, oh, well, actually it just starts building up in yourself. And then I think it's easier a little bit to do the practices also that the other venerables were sharing. So it's always different depending on our karmic conditions, depending on what we have somewhat developed in the past. And the last thing is also like really try out different meditation practices, maybe like different teachings, and see what actually really interests your mind. Because sometimes it can also be at the very beginning, I was trying to really force myself to do Anapanasati, and it was just not happening. Like my mind was like, this is really boring. I don't want to do it. But once I shifted and started doing other type of practices, namely, it really switched with mindfulness of emotions. Wow, my mind was like, this is great. This is very interesting. I want to do it. The 4 elements, fantastic. Give me more than that. So really depends on each one of us. Anyway, so we're 4 minutes out of time. So I think we can end it now. And I would like to end it with actually, there was Kumu's message that says, conveying merit gaining from participating in this wonderful discussion to dear Stan. We got to see him in many live streams. That's true. He was always walking around when he could. Once he also actually, I think, ate the orchid live, which then was followed by like an emergency vet.
The lilies.
Yes, the lily. And thanks to someone online, actually, because we didn't know that lilies were poisonous to cats, then he was transported to the emergency room. So
he's also like knocked the camera around. He's participated in the live streams in many unorthodox ways.
Definitely in 2020, he was very active, like, instead of spot the cat.
Like you get his tail like bobbing up and down along the bottom of the screen. Anyway, we should go ahead and end for the evening.
All right, so we can end with 3 sadhus.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.